Welcome, everyone. It is a couple of minutes past 2, and we still have people joining us, but I want to be mindful of those that joined us already and figure that the remaining participants will catch up as they come in. So thank you very much. You should be seeing on your screen my slide deck. If you've got it pulled up, if you are on the phone, hopefully the PDF that I sent out is helpful so you can follow along on that. And with that, I will hand it off to Jeremy.
You may have to unmute.
Jeremy, you need to unmute. Okay.
He is still muted.
Yeah, we see that. Your call, Rich. He may have gotten called away by something.
Hey, folks, sorry about that. I was the screen had frozen up on me and I couldn't get the unmute to work, but hopefully you can hear me now.
We can.
All right, good. Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone to the TA grants onboarding webinar for today. And it's really a pleasure to have so many folks with us, and looking at the participant list here, it continues to grow. So we're over 100 people now. But I wanted to just spend a few moments to talk a little bit about the technical assistance program, and just as our CEO welcome you to the program. We're getting ready to start our 5th year of the TA grants, and so you're coming in at a time where we have just such a strong program in place, a lot of good work that's occurred over the last 4 years with the program, and certainly no shortage of work to be done in the future, and that's certainly why you're with us today. So we really just appreciate all of the states, the territories, the individual conservation districts that have expressed interest in the program, that have submitted applications, and we are looking forward to getting work underway with our next round of TA grant recipients. As I'm sure Meg and Rich and others on the webinar today will explain, we do this work in partnership with one of our closest federal partners, the Natural Resources Conservation Service at USDA. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge the support from USDA, from NRCS, in terms of working with NACD, working with our state and local partners to make this program happen. We're very grateful for the agreement that supports this work, and look forward to continuing to work with NRCS with the successful implementation of the grants program, and ultimately to meet the needs of local communities that the grant program is in place to help support, to continue to handle the increased workload that we're seeing across the country, to continue to respond to the diverse resource needs that exist within each community, ultimately to strengthen conservation delivery across the country. And if you're paying attention to any of the news headlines these days, there's even more attention, more discussion about conservation, about climate mitigation, climate response than ever. And most all of those conversations are occurring with USDA really at the top of the list, and specifically the NRCS. So, there's so much good work that's already occurred through this program. I think there will continue to be strong opportunities for NACD, for conservation districts to be at the table, to be with our federal partner in terms of looking at opportunities to continue to provide strong services, strong programs to landowners across the country. A few things that we also are mindful of in terms of working with USDA. Certainly, we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the participants, the communities that you serve. We also want to be mindful of, topics like diversity and equity and inclusion, that the services that are being provided are reaching all of the community needs and the members of the community that have needs. And I know that topic is front and center for our conservation districts as public institutions that serve the public needs. And that certainly is something that we at the National Association recognize, appreciate, and strive to address through our program offerings. So again, it's my pleasure to be with you. Sorry for the technical snafu there at the beginning, but just wanted to welcome everyone, say thank you for being part of the program, for being part of the webinar today, and I look forward to the rest of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. We appreciate having you with us and having your support with this program. For today, we've got a fairly full agenda, running through, at least trying to give everybody a good orientation on, if you're starting a brand new grant or your new staff on an existing grant, an idea of what we're looking for in terms of responsibilities and where to go if you're looking for help. We're going to handle all of the questions at the end, but what you can do during the presentation when you have a question, either use the chat box and just send it out, and then we'll run through the list of all the questions that get posted to the chat box, or our North Central Region Rep, Beth Mason, has offered to help out. And so for someone who isn't on Zoom, you're using your phone, or if the chat box is giving you issues, you can simply text straight to her and she'll pass the questions then on to Rich and I to answer at the end. So the phone number for anyone who can't see the screen is 317-946-4463. And for anyone who's listening to the recording after the fact, you're always welcome to reach out to your region rep or to myself with any questions you might have after the presentation. So we're going to start right off with staffing, because as you're starting up a grant in particular, that's where a lot of initial questions that come to us is, wait, we've set up a budget, we came up with a plan, now we've got to actually staff it, and can we do X, Y, and Z? The first thing I want to mention is pay scale. A lot of people ask, well, what should we be paying the person? And hopefully you went through this when you developed your budget, but it still comes up often after the fact. The fact of the matter is that these grants cover the entire country, including a few territories, and pay scale is very variable. So in one part of the country, what a, say, generalist might be paid is very different than some of the technical specialists, the engineers, the watershed coordinators, or archaeologists, even in some cases. And so we do not set a pay scale or give recommendations on what you ought to be paying your staff for this. We expect you to acknowledge that these are public funds. As Jeremy said, this program is developed in partnership with NRCS. We're using public funds to staff these grants. And so within the public nature, we figure that you will respect the fact that you're going to have to pay enough to hire competent personnel, but you need to follow any kind of local rules as far as in terms of pay scale, and respect the fact that we shouldn't be paying exorbitant salaries for people, and respect that. If you really struggle with pay scale, I might recommend that you reach out to your state association. They may or may not, I can't speak for all of them, but they may have some guidance they can give you on a staff of fitting that description is typically in the state paid this amount. Another place to reach out would be your land grant university's ag economics department. I am positive that they will have someone on staff who is watching agriculture related salaries across the state and can give you some fairly clear guidelines on, typically within your state, possibly your region of the state, what it is that that type of job description is paying. The other part of staffing, of course, is do you want to use employees or contractors? From NACD's point of view, we are open to either. The one thing I really want to stress, though, is if you're going the contractor route, please make sure you review the IRS's rules on who is a contractor and who is an employee. They are very clear cut in terms of, particularly it's called out for supervision, of how much supervision you can give a contractor versus what you might be expecting to do with an employee. The other difference between employees and contractors is, of course, that with an employee, you're going to have some degree of fringe benefits. Often enough, when we talk about fringe benefits, people's brains go to health insurance, retirement, holiday, and vacation pay. And that is certainly part of it, but those are often a locally made decision on whether that's going to be included in fringe. Fringe starts with the federal taxes that you're responsible to pay for any kind of employees that you have. The list here on the slide is only meant to be suggestive. I am not a tax expert. So talk to someone that understands taxes, talk to your state compliance officer, and make sure you understand what you're paying in terms of fringe benefits, what you're expected to pay, and et cetera. And be aware that for an employee, you're going to pay for fringe. Okay, and so that gets us to the next topic, which is finances, the money. On the slide, what you see is a section from the MOA that you signed. I will reference through this whole presentation a number of places where I refer back to your MOA. Those MOAs may seem like they're chock full of a lot of text, and at 5 pages it certainly is, but there are a lot of things laid out in it that you can find useful as you're working through your grant. In particular, I would say don't bury your MOA, put it in a file and make sure that it's clear so other people can find it if they need to refer to your MOA. When it comes to your finances, we do realize that for some of the people with TA grants, you've handled a lot of grants. You understand most of what's involved with the financial side of things. And so what I'm going to run through is probably going to be very much just a quick review. But we also end up with the TA grants having a lot of grantees where this is the first time dealing with a grant and what's required of it. So hopefully this will give you a little bit of a overview. Someone, Crystal, you're unmuted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So if this is your first time handling grants, hopefully what I'll cover next will give you a little bit of understanding of what's going on. We are certainly here to help you if you have further questions that are specific to your situation, because that certainly happens. Crystal. Thank you. So when it comes to your finances, one of the things I want to touch on first is how we name the grants. The new year grants are TA 2021. And so we often get asked, does that mean it's supposed to run for a fiscal year? Does that mean that it's supposed to run for the calendar year of 2021? And the answer to both of those are no. Your grant is named because the funds were available as awards in 2021 initially. And so that's how we've named your grant. Referring to the MOA, as you'll see as you read through it, the grants are meant to run for 13 months after the second signature. And so wherever that second signature date-wise falls, that's when the clock starts. The other thing I want to mention with finances is we do offer direct deposit for the transfer of funds. Many of you have taken advantage of it, but it's not everybody is signed up. It is a separate form you need to file with us, but especially after dealing with COVID and closed offices last year, recognizing that there still may be district operations going on due to COVID. Direct deposit means that the funds will be in your bank account without someone needing to watch for a check to come in and make sure to grab it in the mail if they're not in the office every day. If you're interested in that, that's an email to your region rep. They can send you the form and instructions on what you need to fill it out. Financial tools is how are you going to keep track of your grant expenditures, your grant funds, what's coming in and what's going out. And we do not specify what you're using for that financial tool. We have plenty of grantees that use QuickBooks. We've got other grantees that use Excel spreadsheets, and the district I'm thinking of, the staff has since retired, but a couple of years ago, we had one grantee who was actually using paper ledger books and was filling everything out by hand on paper. Whatever tool you're most familiar with when it comes to keeping track of financial accounts is the tool we want you to use, something that you're comfortable with. We do have some templates of Excel spreadsheets if we can share with you if you're curious and want to go that route, but want some ideas of how to set it up, whether you follow the template or just use it as a guide. And we do have one district in particular whose staff is extremely QuickBooks savvy, who has offered that she can help anyone that's trying to set up QuickBooks for handling the grants. The thing that we want you to keep in mind, whatever tool you're using, is you need to keep clean records. And by clean records, what I mean is that you're going to have situations with staff turnover. By the time over the 13 months of the grant, it may not be you, it may be the district sitting next to you, but you're going to have someone having staff changeover. And I can speak that forensic accounting is tough. Whatever you're using as your bookkeeping method, keep it clean, keep notes to go with it. Something that someone replacing you, possibly without even you being able to be a phone call away, can pick up, figure out what you've done, and take the next step forward. The other thing that we're going to insist on is that you keep your grant funds, including a match, so your project funds, separate from your general funds. Now, I'm not saying set up a separate bank account. That's excessive and it's not needed in this case. But what you need to do within QuickBooks, within an Excel spreadsheet, is you need from the beginning to say, okay, we have a grant for, say, $40,000. We're putting up $10,000 out of district funds, or maybe it's state agency funds, somewhere. Cash is being also put into it. So in that separate accounting system, I'm going to put all of that into it and then charge my expenditures against it. If you try to track this within your general funds, it usually ends up getting very messy very quickly. And it gets away from the whole idea of clean books that someone else can recover behind you. And that gets to the whole topic of match, because a lot of people, both within TA grants and outside of it and other types of grants, start getting confused when you talk about match. And part of that confusion in my mind comes from the fact that there's two different flavors of match. Cash match is the easier flavor to understand. It's saying we're spending local funds. Again, it might be district funds, it might be state agency funds that are sent to you, the district, to use with these grants. It could be funds that you're getting from another and from an NGO who sees the value of what you're doing and is willing to support by supplying some of the cash match. I'm going to call the guy in the picture here Joe. I have no idea what his name is. And Joe is funded by a TA grant. They're paying his salary with it. And the district, to use the numbers I kicked out before, is putting towards $10,000 to help pay his salary. So they've got a $50,000 project. Some of it is probably going for other types of expenses, but let's think about his salary right now. Cash is the funds, the local funds that you're spending, particularly in this case on a salary. It could be for some of the other expenses that you wouldn't spend if you didn't have Joe doing the TA grant work. It might be funds that you already have coming from your own general fund, or it could be these outside funds coming in. But any way you slice it, you're not paying that portion of Joe's salary and expenses unless you had a TA grant to employ Joe. In-kind match can also be referred to as in-kind credit, because what you're doing is you're taking it as a credit towards match for something that you'd spend anyway. And this starts getting a little bit touchy-feely in some cases, and so it gets a little bit confusing at times. The basic idea is that you would spend the money anyway, but because you've got Joe working for you, Joe is using whatever that money was spent on to help him with his job. A couple examples to kind of give a flavor of this is Joe's an employee. So someone within your organization is in charge of checking his timesheets and making sure he gets paid. That person, for the sake of the argument, is already salaried, not connected to the grant and soft money. They're paid whether they spend time doing Joe's payroll or not. They're paid for their time, and they'd be doing something else if you didn't have Joe. It comes down to maybe they only spend 10 minutes a pay period, so not even 30 minutes a month on this. But when you take it out to the quarter, which is our reporting cycle, you're talking an hour or so of their time spent making sure Joe gets paid. Like I said, this person would get paid anyway. They're just taking their job product and applying it to the grant. In that case, their salary, fringe, whatever, for that hour or two that you're claiming for the quarter is in-kind match. You would spend the resources on them anyway. In this case, you're spending their resources to support Joe. Example with supplies would be, say, your office manager. And for that, I'm kind of generalizing a little bit because I know district offices can vary from one person up to a full team of who knows how many. But your office manager is in charge of restocking the printer paper. They buy it by the box, which is usually 5 or 10 separate packages, each package called ream, and they buy it for the office out of the general fund. Joe decides he needs to print a pile of reports out for individual producers, and he uses an entire package of paper. Now that's like 500 sheets, but for the sake of argument, go along with me. Buying that box of paper, the full box with multiple reams in it, is a general fund supply expense. If Joe actually was to sit in one afternoon, go through a ream, a package of 500 sheets, you could then charge as an in-kind credit, an in-kind match, the cost of that individual ream of paper. Most offices, I suspect you're not worrying about how many sheets of paper anyone in particular is using, but it makes, in my mind, a very clear example of what is an in-kind expense. While I'm on in-kind, I also want to mention your board. Your board of supervisors, commissioners, whatever they're called within your system, spends time at their regular, often monthly, board meetings, talking about your TA grant, what's getting accomplished, what Joe's doing. They may be paid, which then becomes pretty straightforward in kind, just the cost of whatever you're paying them, but they also could be unpaid. And when they're unpaid, NACD puts their value at per person $50 an hour. So say at your board meeting, you've got, for sake of argument, 4 board members present, and you spend 15 minutes talking about what Joe's doing. That board meeting then gave you 4 times 15 minutes out of an hour, so a quarter, times $50 an hour, which ends up being a $50 in-kind credit match. Those are just some of the things that jump out to me. We do have some resources. The links are here on the screen. To get to these, they are posted to the TA 2021 webpage. You can find them both on there for active links. The first one, the reporting guidance, is actually a story example. We've got the amazing conservation district gets a TA grant. A bunch of things happen during the quarter, and then it walks through what's allowable, what's in kind, and then takes it a step further of actually taking the numbers that are generated within the example and filling out the reporting form so you can actually see where things go. The second, the match reference guide, was actually put together by our finance staff, and it's looking at what references are out there, including the IRS as well as others, on what is in-kind match and what is match. And so between the two of them, hopefully you can get a better understanding of what you can count and how you can count it. I also want to mention, while we're on match, your grants required a minimum 20% of the project budget to be matched. You're always, some of you promised a lot more than that, but you're always welcome to claim additional match. If you discover as you work through your grant that you actually have other ways that you can supply match to these grants on top of what you had planned, please go ahead and capture them. We take that information for our report back to the NRCS to try to help support the fact that people are doing more than just the minimum that get these grants. They are finding them extremely worthwhile and putting extra resources to making things practical. Okay, the last thing to talk about before we move on is you're into your grant and you realize you need to modify your budget. Your MOA gives you the initial guidance on how to handle this, and that is that your grant funds come from one of 3 program funds: equipped, CSP, or CODA, or technical assistance funds. Your MOA specifies the breakdown between the 3 programs, and anything up to 10% of the value of an individual program, you can go ahead and switch to a different program. That's fine. You don't need to notify us. You can just do that within your own management. If you want to move between programs an amount larger than 10%, then you need to reach out to us and get permission to be able to do it. It does say secure written approval. Most of those types of conversations are handled entirely by email, unless your organization, and there are more than a few, that require a formal addendum to your MOA to represent the change. In that case, we would be happy to supply you with that, but only if you ask it. It isn't our normal way of handling it. The other side of changing, modifying your budget is the budget worksheet you completed had about a half dozen expense items. You are welcome to look into moving things between expense items if you need to. As a year into a grant, 6 months into a grant, and you may find that things change. Things aren't quite working the way you wanted it to. This past year, people that budgeted for training suddenly found themselves with excess training funds left. And so if you find that you want to make a shift between expense items, what we need is a new budget worksheet. If you've misplaced the budget worksheet you completed with your application, we can supply you with it. We do keep them on file, but you can also go again to the TA 2021 webpage and download a blank budget worksheet and put it together with the new numbers. And this would then get submitted and have to be okayed by our staff before you undertake your plan changes. So that gets us to the next section on accomplishments. The important to stress from the MOA is that when it comes to what work you're getting done with these grants, the accomplishments, the activities are what you put forth in your application that then became the Exhibit 1 portion of your MOA. And that is the work we want to hear about. Obviously, you might get other things accomplished. That's what the narrative section of the report is for. But when it comes to accomplishments, that's really the focus, is what are you planning on using this program funds for? I cannot stress enough that before you get involved into your grant, whoever is doing the work should be expected to keep their own individual log of what's happening, because we don't want to know everything that's going on in your office. We want to know what the TA grant staff is doing in your office. So asking NRCS to go into their system to download once a quarter to give you a report may or may not be the complete picture. It may entail work that was done by your DC or other NRCS staff. The individual person that's getting the accomplishments done should be keeping their own private log so that they don't need to be tapping back into other systems to be able to do the reporting that we require. With that in mind, I'll mention this when we get into reporting, but there is a preview that you can download of the accomplishments report, what's required. And so I would highly encourage your staff to take the preview. It's a PDF, and use that to build out whatever they're going to use for reporting. I'm only going to touch on the accomplishments reporting to give you a little bit of an overview of what sort of things we're looking for. In most cases, when you are reporting your accomplishments, you're reporting based on what program funds are in your MOA. So you should be aware of what program funds you are working with, and if you don't have funding in all three, then don't expect to make your reports in all three. Doesn't mean that you might not have something to report in, say, that other program, but that's where we're looking for your reports. The equipped reporting is probably the most extensive. It really comes down to 4 pieces. We're looking at assisted contracts, which is kind of the idea of, for any contracts, how many times you're touching it. And that may be multiple times over the course of a year. It may only be once. It's just meant to be, how much is this helping the program, equipped being the program, along. And in some cases, this may be the only equip that you actually have to log and keep track of. I'm thinking here of, say, some of the archaeologists doing cultural clearances. They don't know which contracts they're working on. They just know that they need to do cultural clearances on these plots to help with equip work. So they're only getting counted under assisted contracts. Contracts obligated is a step in the NRCS process. And again, let me stress, we're looking for numbers of what your TA grant person is doing, maybe not the full picture of what your office is accomplishing. Contract acres is something that is logged with the contracts and should be easy enough to pull up. Notice that we also have a call out for historically underserved producers. If you're not familiar with this label, it is a voluntary label that the producers can opt to select. When it comes to reporting, the number of contracts obligated under historically underserved should be part of the total contracts obligated that you are reporting. The last section of equipped is what usually ends up being the very more detailed hard work part, and that is for equipped, we want to know about each and every practice code that was designed, installed, or certified. And we do realize that design might actually happen before you have an obligated contract. We also lump in with that things like layout. Certified, of course, is an NRCS step, and so you should respect that. The next program fun is CSP, and this one gets a little tough for some people understanding how it works. As you look at the list of what we're looking for, what you'll notice here is we're not looking for CSP practices. Our CSP funding is great if you've got the workload to be focused on practices, but we're really looking for outreach. We want people to be more aware of CSP. We want people to see the value of CSP brings to their operation. And with that, the main things we're collecting for CSP is how many contacts, how many people are you interacting with, telling them about the program, and the number of presentations. And we're not talking about an entire field day focused on CSP, but if you have a field day planned, then add a CSP portion into the presentation, count that as one presentation, and give us an approximate number of how many people attended. If you do that across a quarter or across a year, it will start to add up. The last piece of CSP that we ask for are the number of plans and contracts, just because we want to see what impact that outreach, those presentations might be having on CSP work in your office. Again, for CSP, we are not looking for practice. I do not want to hear about practice codes. We just want to know what's going on in terms of outreach. What are you doing with it? The last section is technical assistance, CODA, or CTA, as some people like to call it. Technical assistance tracking, we're looking for resource concerns. What is being sought from your office in terms of technical assistance? We are looking at contacts. This is kind of respecting the idea that technical assistance may not end up with written plans. It may not even end up with someone taking out an equip contract, but it starts at the field day gate. It starts at the local coffee shop of someone's having the conversation of, I've got this problem, and your technical assistance staff saying, there are ways to solve that. Let me help you walk through. And by the way, we do have programs that could address this. Whether they take you up on the programs or not is a different matter. The last part of technical assistance is how many written conservation plans has your office developed? And so that certainly would be a great conclusion to that field gate conversation. But work gets done even outside of those written plans, possibly because of that field gate conversation. And that gets to reporting. What do we need? What are we looking for when it comes to reporting on your grants? What we require from you is that you submit a report every 90 days based on the calendar quarters. Your MOA, as it says here, specifies exactly when those due dates are. It also gives you a link that takes you to the top level forms. I'm going to show you another way to get to it in a minute. The one thing we have to stress is even if you're missing information, a report is still due. We still require it. We do have one waiver on that, and that is that we ask you to report, not to invoice. And the reason we ask you to report is because we're advancing the funds to you. So you need to turn in a report explaining what you've done with the funds and what you've accomplished. For some cases, some situations, people have asked us to hold off advancing funds. Possibly they're working in an earlier grant. Possibly they have a different type of funding that's ending in 60 days, and then they want to start their TA grant. If you haven't been advanced any of your TA grant funds, then we waive the requirement of a report. What that means is you're still welcome to do reports, but we're not going to penalize you for not having submitted a report. To get to the reporting, there is the link in your MOA, but the easiest way to do it is to go to our website. The TA grant information is under the blue tab, What We Do. And if you go down, there's actually 5 different web pages connected to the TA grants. It doesn't matter which of the 5 pages you're on. There'll be a block of text and then a set of rectangular buttons. The lower right button on all 5 pages is the TA grant reporting portal. It will take you straight to a site that's just focused on helping you turn in the reports you need to turn in. I'm not going to show you the full page. I just wanted to pull out the pieces that were important. On that page is the same schedule of what is the reporting period and when is that report due. So if you've got questions on when the next report is due, and you're welcome to just pull it right up off the portal. I do want to stress that if the 20th falls on a federal holiday or a weekend, it is pushed to the next regular federal workday, and that just happens automatically. I do send out reminders. We have a TA grant listserv. You've probably already seen a few emails, including the reminder about this webinar, registration for it. Go out through the listserv. When it comes to reporting, I send typically 3 reminders. Dates can fluctuate a little bit depending on my schedule, let alone weekends and holidays, but typically I will send out the first reminder on the 1st of the month. So for the next set of reports will be due by October 20th. I should be sending out the first reminder to everyone on the listserv on October 1st. It will include the link to this page, the grant reportal, and possibly whatever is going on that I think might need some extra reminders to pay attention to, keep track of, and that sort of thing. I'll send a second email approximately the 9th or the 10th. It also goes out to everybody, but on it, I'll include a list of who owes me reports still. If you're not on that list and you turned in your reports, or you think your point reports are waived, you're good. If you are on the list, then it means that I think you're missing a report or 2, but you still have time, roughly another week and a half, to get that turned in. If you think you shouldn't be on the list and you are, it's because there's a few different points that within the system is how it sorts the reports for me and logs who's turned one in or not. And a mistake was made in your reporting and it's not sorting it properly. The fact of the matter is, in a typical quarter, I get about 500 to 600 individual reports come through. I don't read every single report during the 20 days that they're due. I would do nothing else but read reports. So if you've made one of those minor errors, identified the wrong grant or the wrong reporting period, even the wrong year in some cases, it's not going to sort your report and log you as successfully submitting it within my system. And so that reminder email, if you're on it, it means that one of those things needs to get fixed. These are minor issues that are easy to fix, but I won't go looking for them or figure out what to do with it if I don't have an email back from you saying I'm on that list and I shouldn't be. I send out the same reminder on approximately the 19th or the 20th, again with what's hopefully a much shorter list of who still owes me reports. All three of those emails go out to everyone. So the thing to remember with email 2 and email 3 is if you're not on the list, you're good. If you're on the list, you either need to get me a report or we need to figure out what happened to what you submitted. After the 20th, then I start, for anyone who hasn't turned in a report, focused emails that only go to the people that forgot to get the report in to remind them. And so you won't hear from the listserv any more reminders from me. The other part of the TA grants reporting portal is the bottom half of the page is this set of 6 buttons. These are 6 individual reports that need to be submitted at different times in different situations. The top 2 are the quarterly reports. Those are the 2 reports that I expect to see from every single grantee from the point we send you money until the point you close the grant. There is one caveat on that. If you turn in a financial report that shows 0 expenditures, you've spent no money during this quarter, then we waive the requirement of turning in an accomplishments report. Anytime a report is waived, you are always welcome, to go ahead and submit a report. Gives you a chance to get to know the form, certainly, but I'm not going to be nagging at you if you haven't submitted the report. So those first 2 are the 2 that you really got to make sure you get submitted by the 20th of the quarter it's due. The other 4 reports are all situational reports. NRCS requests that we collect information on who these grants are staffing, what people are working for them. This includes information that not only on job title, but also census data. Obviously, census data in particular is voluntary, but we appreciate it if you're going to fill it out for us. Rather than having you have to fill it out every single quarter, which we used to have the system set up for, the staffing update report should be completed when you start a grant, and then anytime your staffing changes. As long as you haven't changed staff, staff makeup, it could be a new person, it may be a new job position, you don't need to update the form. We're only looking for it to be done when you start the grant and then when things change. The final report is how you close grants. And I'll talk about the whole process when we get to the last part of this presentation, closing grants, but this is where you find the report for it. The contact and listserv info is twofold. First off, the contact is who we're looking for. If we have questions, who do we reach out to contact? Most likely it's the name that you used on your application that's on your MOA, but we realize staff changes. This is how you tell us, please stop contacting Susie and start contacting Jen. It also respects the fact that offices move, phone numbers change. And so if you have any information in that terms, rather than sending an email, which can very easily get buried with other emails, use the contact and listserv info update, and then it's logged in the system and can get carried over for both the region reps and myself to be able to find and access when we need to reach out to you to ask a question. The other side of this form is the listserv. Everybody whose name's on the MOA is automatically added to the TA grant listserv, but in many cases, there might be other people in your office or even an alternative email that you'd also like the reminders to go to. And so the contact and listserv information is how you give us those names. I update the listserv roughly once a month, so it may take a couple of weeks before that change is made, but this is how you do it. There's room for, I think, 4 extra emails to be added on the form beyond the contact person. I think I've only run into one case where people had more than that they wanted to add. You should complete this form at the beginning of your grant, just because we want to make sure that we've got you in the system with the correct information. And then anytime you have to change your contact, or you want to change who's listed up on the listserv and getting my emails, you would use the form again. Typically, aside from the 3 reminders that I send out when it comes to reporting, or when there's something like this webinar happening or more funds available, I don't tend to send out a lot of emails. And so hopefully you won't feel like you're getting bombarded by being on the listserv. The last button on the reports form is for the map data collector. This is the story map that is on all of the TA grant pages, with pictures, with abstracts, and possibly links to any electronic stories. Talking about pictures, I want to mention that all the pictures that you're seeing on these slides came from different TA grant awardees and the picture that they uploaded to be added to the story map. For the new grants that were awarded this summer, your abstract was part of your application, and so that's already been entered. But you can always give us something different now that you see how it's being used. You can always upload a picture to be used in place of the placeholder, which is just the NACDC. And or if you have a story written and you want to share the link, we can add it. The map is only updated once a year in the summer, but you are welcome to upload information anytime during the year. Last year was our first year with this, and I gave out reminders a few times during the year. This year, I probably won't put out an actual reminder to the listserv till we get close to the update next summer. So that is where you can find the information and should cover all of your reporting needs. So that leads us to what sort of typical issues do we see? The first typical issue that happens across the board is staff turnover. Usually what we hear about is we had a very experienced staff. We had big plans for what they were going to do with this grant. We've hired someone who's brand new and needs a ton of training. And what do? Believe me, we understand. We know it's frustrating, but it's actually part of the system. A lot of the staff turnover are being absorbed off of staff money, because grants are soft money, and being hired by NRCS. Not saying it happens every time, but a large percentage of our staff are. It's a great move for them, but it's also a great for the conservation community. We're getting trained staff, fully appreciating what happens at a district level, because I've worked there, and moving on to be able to do bigger and better things. For you as the employer, of course, it means you've got to re-advertise. You'll have downtime getting the new person on staff, and you may have to adjust your budgets to support the new person as they get up to speed. All of that is perfectly all right and acceptable in the system. Send an email specifying out what's going on and be able to move beyond it. If you need to modify your budget, we've already covered that section. It's a straightforward sort of experience and one that many districts have gone through. We'll get through it. We'll extend the MOA, not a problem. Then, of course, we get to the current medical issues, COVID. Last year, of course, offices were highly impacted by COVID restrictions, but we still are experiencing much of the same in slightly different ways. The quarterly financial report has the questions asking about how you're impacted by COVID. It has a checklist of typical responses of what we've seen from other district offices, as well as room to add your own special twist of what it's doing in keeping you from having normal operations. We want you to use that space to document what is going on due to COVID. We compile it from across the country and share it as a snapshot to NRCS so that they're aware of what's the impact on these grants because of the situation as a nation we are going through. Then we get to missing information. If you remember, I mentioned from the MOA, just because you're missing information, your report is still required. Some of the common problems are staff are out on vacation and sick. Usually it's an overlap. Someone was on vacation, planned on doing the report on the 19th, and now the person they need to talk to is sick. And what are they going to do? Another thing, especially with closed offices, is lack of computer access. I got sent home. I don't have my files. I don't have a working computer. Okay, I understand problems happen, and especially if you're the one out sick, it's the last thing you want to do is worry about this. Our reporting forms do not have a login. On any of the forms, when you go in, you are presented with a drop-down list of all of the active grants. And yeah, I know it's kind of long, but it is in alphabetical order by state and territory, so you can at least jump to the right area pretty quickly. Anyone can go in and submit a report for you. Furthermore, the reporting forms and our website, for that matter, work on smartphones and on tablets. So if you've got a smartphone in your hand with internet access or Wi-Fi access, you should be able, someone should be able to submit a report. So if you're out sick, you can always find someone, hopefully, that will turn in a report saying, everybody's out sick, we will turn in a report when we can, and people are back at the office. It's a placeholder, but it follows the requirements of the MOA, and so you're meeting your need. It also allows us to document what's going on. The other missing information is finance staff are still processing expenditures, or I still need to get the accomplishments from whomever's responsible for collecting them. If this is a one-off problem, just turn in a report saying we're missing this information. We'll get it as soon as we can. If it's a problem, particularly expenditures is called out here because of a particular example I'm thinking of, where getting the expenditures was always running a month behind, then we just change what expenditures are reported when and make sure we don't miss any months. It's a matter of just shifting your reporting to fit what you have information-wise. We can work with these, you need to be thinking outside the box. If you are really desperate trying to get in a report, I can't commit the region reps, but I have known the region reps to take someone's situation and turn in a placeholder report for them. You can always ask. It would be my response, but I can't say that they will have the time and opportunity to do it for you. So how, if you turned in a placeholder report, or down the road you went along and then realized I forgot to report whatever, could be dollars, it could be accomplishments. How do you make those corrections? In the report is this question: is this your first financial report for this grant and this reporting period? And that's how we handle when you need to turn in a second report. I call this the funky question because a lot of people, I think, aren't quite sure what I'm asking. You can see in the yellow print, I've tried to give you a little bit of guidance. There's actually an example you can link to that will walk you through. But basically, this grant means whichever grant you're reporting on. TA 2021 would be in most cases. This reporting period, say it's the next reports that are due, would be the quarter ending September 30th, 2021. And if it's your first time submitting that report, you would check yes and go on your merry way. If you need to submit a second report for that period, you're going to choose one of the second or third options. The difference is that if you choose the middle option, replace, then I'm going to go back in, find that first report you submitted, the one that was, say, a placeholder report or had the errors, delete it entirely out of the system and use the report that you're submitting now. The last option is, I just need to add a few more hours, a few more expenses, make some small tweak. You don't need to re-enter everything. Use the third option, and it just tells me, take this report and add it to the previous report. That is your way of correcting reports, correcting information. And this is on both, as I said, the financial and the accomplishments report. And that reminds me, the one thing I forgot to mention on the list of all 6 forms is on the first page of every form, there is a link to a preview, a PDF showing you exactly what questions are on the form. You can download that preview, that PDF, and be able to know what you're getting into before you actually submit the form. So then the next question becomes, in particular, I had staff turnover, something wasn't able to be accomplished, took me time to rehire. How do you extend your MOA? We have a master agreement with NRCS. As long as you are extending your MOA, but your new end date is still within our master agreement, and you have been reporting properly, showing us what you're doing and where you're having problems, extending your MOA is simply a matter of exchanging emails with your region rep, specifying what the cause is, how you plan to address it, and make a new suggestion for an end date so that they can be sure that your new plans will still have your grant ending on time. If you want to extend it past our master agreement, that becomes an issue, but that shouldn't be a problem because typically we have 3 years as compared to your 1 year. So we have time to make a 90-day adjustment here or there. And that gets into the fact of when are you out of compliance with your MOA. The main cause of being out of compliance with your MOA is lack of reporting. And it's not that we're going to cancel your MOA immediately if you didn't get your report in by the 20th, but in most cases, it might affect your ability of being able to get additional funding if you are regularly past the 20th. The 20th is set because we then have to turn in a report to NRCS that's due at the end of the month. And having that roughly, it's 10 days total, but not all of that, of course, is work days, to compile all the results and put them into a single report is what we need. So you turning in your report late means you're not included in the quarterly compile. It is included in the overall of what's getting accomplished. It will be included in the next quarter, but it also just adds stress to the machine. Non-compliance in terms of not getting started on your project happens, and that isn't a main issue. As I said, extending your MOA is something that we have built into the system as an option. So really the only non-compliance that we're paying attention to is your reporting. We expect you, in terms of doing the work that you specified in your Exhibit 1 in your application, to be happening. And so we really aren't watching too heavily in that terms for non-compliance. As we said, we do expect that other things may happen in the life of your grant. So how do you close your grant? In most cases, you're looking at closing your grant when you've spent all of your grant funds and your match. You've exhausted everything. You're ready to close your grant and turn in the final paperwork. Sometimes, particularly, we see it when there's staff turnover, the excuse me, your organization might decide to close the grant before you've exhausted all of your funds, and you'll be returning some funds back to us. It happens. We'd rather work with you to find out if there's a way we can continue the project with you and make it viable, but we understand that may not be the case. In either case, where you're going is that final report that's back on the TA grant portal. The process is, before you submit a final report, first submit a financial report that covers from your last financial report to the point that you either declared we're closing the grant or the grant funds are exhausted. So if I had a grant that closed today, my last report went through June 30th, and so a financial report would be needed to be submitted from July 1st to September 16th. Step 2 would be submitting an accomplishments report covering the same period. Pretty straightforward. That's just to make sure all of your reporting is submitted and up to date. At that point, you'd submit a final report form. The final report form asks that you commit that, yes, we spent all our grant funds, or we didn't. This is how much we think we spent and how much we'll be returning back to NACD. It then asks what your total match is, because while you proposed a certain amount of match, we want to make sure that our reported match matches what you think the match should be. And then it looks for a final narrative. 300 words is kind of the ballpark we're looking for. It's a chance to put a capstone on what was accomplished, possibly discussing what else happened because you had the grant. What you put in your narrative is your choice. When that final report comes through, it comes to me as a flag, and I go through, make sure our numbers match, and then send back a confirmation that your grant's closed. If you're returning funds, I send back the information of where to send the funds and such, and then when the check comes back, I'll send the confirmation. Now, excuse me a second. So you've got a grant and you have new funding and you've reached the end of your existing fund. The new funding may be what we call gap funds, which is additional funding within the same grant cycle that your grant is. So we've got some 10,000 unallocated funds. Would you like a little bit extra before you close your grant? Gap funds always go on your existing MOA, and they become part of it in the sense that we're not going to close the grant until we spend all the gap funds as well as the original funds. Not saying gap funds are always available. When they are, we do try to encourage participation in gap funds for those whose grants look like they're going to end before the new grant cycle funds may be available. And so you can always ask for gap funds, but we're probably not looking for it unless you have that gap, funding gap. We want to keep the staff employed and on getting paid as part of that. So we're going to offer gap funds for those situations. If you have a new MOA to move into, say you've spent all your TA 2021 funds, but you applied for and received TA 2022 funds, that's a brand new MOA. We have to draw a line between the two MOAs by closing the first grant up officially and starting the second. So you're going to keep the accounting between the two grants separate and the reporting separate. So I know I've covered a bunch of things. You're going to have questions. I see quite a few already in the chat list. So we're certainly, I appreciate the questions. Finding help, your first step for finding help is your NACD region representative. There are 7 across the country, and they will be the first place you should reach out when you have questions, including if you think it's a question that you want me to answer instead of them. I am going to include them in my answer to you, so you might as well reach out to us both and include them yourself. When you complete the reporting forms, there is a question asking which NACD region that you're part of. The reason why is because then the reports that you submit get sent to your region rep as well as into my system. And so please make sure that you click the correct region when you're answering that question. You can access the information on how to contact your region reps through the NACD website. There's multiple links of how to access these people. If you think I need to help you, and I certainly am happy to always help, you're welcome, of course, to reach out to me. I do want to mention that in my signature at the bottom of my emails is a line about appointments, and it just says TA Grant Support Scheduling. What this does is it uses a special app that looks at my calendar. Doesn't tell you what's on my calendar, of course, but it looks at my calendar and tells you when I have free time. You're always welcome to call or email me directly if you want help, but if you want to make sure that you're on my calendar and we've got a block of time to be able to talk through what questions you're having, click that link. What it does is it lets you schedule your time on my calendar. So you can see when I'm available, know your own availability, and put it on my calendar at a time that's convenient to both of us, hopefully saving us bopping 4 or 5 emails back and forth going, well, can you do Thursday at 3 or Friday at 2 and such on. When you do use that app, I usually will then loop in your region rep, and if they're available, they'll be able to join. It's set up that we'll make the call through my teleconference line, but you can also specify, I wanted to be able to share something, show something to you, possibly my accounting work. And so we can set up on Zoom if that's what it comes down to. So I covered a lot of information, I realize, and I appreciate everybody hanging in with me. And so question time. Rich, do you want, and it looks like you've been reading some of the questions. I haven't had a chance to look at them. You're muted.
Let me give you a chance to rest your voice, and I will walk through. I have been watching the questions as they come in. We've got some that are really information sharing, and certainly David Williams has done that for a couple in the very beginning. And I'm in the interest of time, you all can see those, and so I'm not going to read them. We have one from Kelsey wanting to know how soon that a check or the first payment will be made. We will be very likely sending out the first checks to the newly signed MOAs with this last RFP as early as next Wednesday. So quite regularly then, every 3 months, unless a particular grantee is spending their funds at a more rapid rate than what they thought they were, we'll refill your coffers with another 3-month advance. So we do our darndest and have been successful so far in keeping funds in your account so that you don't have to use your own cash flow to make payroll. There's always going to be an exception. Somebody's going to need something quicker than that. If you do need something different than what our normal schedule is, as Meg has said several times here, your regional rep or Meg or myself can look at exceptional situations. The level of records needed for in-kind match, Carolyn is asking, and certainly your hours as supervising are a good example of a match, and keeping track of them on a spreadsheet is a fine way to do it. The ability to have that document attached to your grant file and in your drawer is satisfactory. You folks have different auditing requirements. Some states audit all their districts every year. Some states do it every 3 years. Some states only audit the funds that come from the state legislature. So whatever you need to do to make sure you are covered for your regular audits, or in some cases, conservation districts have contracts to have local auditing in addition to or in lieu of some kind of state auditing. But certainly fine to use a spreadsheet attached to your other, or included with your other files. Rent can be a match. We need to be careful on rent if it's a federally paid rent, because this is a federal grant fund. These funds are coming from a federal grant, and you can't match that, an NRCS rented office, for example, with this. If a district has expenses, if a grantee has expenses for rent, and you have one of your grantee employees occupying 100 square foot of space because of that, a proportional part of your rent is a legitimate match. And again, you can document that with a simple note explaining how you calculated it and keep that with your file. The standard Excel template that most people use, Microsoft Excel, is what Meg was referring to about templates. I don't believe we've been furnishing any specific accounting Excel templates, but if we need to dig in on that a little bit more, we can. But the standard Microsoft Excel is a tool that a lot of people use as a spreadsheet and keep track of things.
We do have a couple of templates related to tracking for the grant that I can share
Good.
out.
So
They aren't available for you to find. You'll have to ask one of the region reps or myself to send it to you, and I will, Bill.
perfect. Another match kind of question: if you have an outreach event and the public do come, can we count their time as a match? Typically, you can. If you have 20 people coming to a field trial that is showing how to get conservation accomplished, or talking about conservation planning, or an EQIP project, or the like, if that lasts 2 hours and you've got 20 people, you've got 40 hours of match time there. And the hourly rate, to some extent, is your call. There is guidance, and Meg went over some of the match guidance, but you kind of have to evaluate the attendees if it's the public. Obviously, it would be a different calculation if it's a high school class or a grade school class than it would be if you've got 20 producers who would come closer to that $50 an hour match rate that she mentioned for conservation district officials' time devoted to this in terms of match. So again, all you have to do is document. We had a field trial or a field visit or whatever the meeting was, and we had this many people there. Some of our auditors require a list of people by name. So some of your state audits or your local audits might require having the list of names of who participated rather than just an estimated number. But typically, if you have a field day, you're going to know who came there, and you could pretty easily do that. Another question from Kelsey is, would you like us to also include accomplishments related to the grant in our match funds as well? We do want, the match funds are a part of the project. So the $50,000 project that Meg used as an example, 10,000 of which is match, we'd like to see the accomplishments for that total. And the form, I should have said at the beginning before these questions, Meg covered almost every possibility you could think of. It's not, many of you will not run into some of those possibilities. It's a relatively streamlined reporting system. Most of our people are giving us really good grades on how easy it is to use. We do take surveys to improve, and I really compliment Meg and the regional reps that have devoted time, particularly the last couple of years, to continuing to upgrade our reporting system. But bottom line is, it isn't as scary as our hour of discussion today might sound. It's a relatively easy form to use, and particularly those two first forms of the 6 that she identified are the ones you'll be using the most. The others are for exceptions like change of staff and so forth. So for accomplishments, we're asking you to report back to us what you said you were going to do in your application. So if you said that you would be working on EQIP application assistance and you said 20, we would be expecting you to report how many you did. It's okay to have more than what you said. And frankly, there's going to be instances where you have less than what you planned. So far, I would say, having looked at the last 4 years of reports, we're finding people are exceeding what they originally thought they would do. And of course, that helps us document and justify the importance of this way of getting technical assistance delivered. Amanda's got a question here, and she uses an example. And no, you don't have to change the staff report if you've got 3 people working and one doesn't happen to work in a given quarter. As long as you've got everybody loaded in the system for your grant, it's fine. Obviously, it might be that the engineer or the agronomist or the forester didn't work on a given quarter, but she worked at the beginning or she worked at the end. And so that's not an example where you would need a staff report change. Not too many questions here. I know we're running up against some people's time here, but there will be more specific guidance coming out, federal guidance to the NRCS, particularly, and FSA field service centers. And of course, a lot of our grantees, a lot of conservation districts, the majority, in fact, are co-located. And we will, our conservation districts and their employees will have to comply with whatever those specifics are. And some of them have not yet been released, but we all know there's going to be a vaccination request and a social distancing and a limit on how many people in the conference room and masks for people and that kind of thing. So yes, a district employee, if occupying federal space, is going to come under those requirements. And of course, we all hope that we can beat this current surge down and it doesn't, the issue goes away. But I would say this, that conservation districts also have often have other offices And a lot of these employees are field employees who are out of the office more than they're in the office. And so that is a way in which some conservation districts may have to deal with these restrictions, is to not have the employee in the office. We already have had experience this last year of a 50% level, a 25% level, up to 50% again, and back to 25% in some offices. So we've already had employees working remotely, and that, of course, changes the situation. Clearly, we want people to be safe when they go out on a farm, but you're outside typically, and most of the guidance, the health guidance indicates that being outside is one of the safer places to go. And there'll be more on this going forward. I did answer everyone for Annika, our new Northeast regional rep. She is with us today, and so we're introducing you to her today. She comes already with a great deal of knowledge about the Northeast and worked with the American Forest Foundation and other work before that. So you'll find her a quick study and very quickly being able to help you. And she's like some of the rest of you today, seeing this particular presentation pretty much for the first time. We, in your signed MOA, identify the funds that you do have, whether it's CODA, CSP, or EQIP. From time to time, a grantee finds they do need or would like to change fund categories because the workload changed, or for some reason they had to make a shift. We can generally work something out if it's in the middle of our grant cycle, but we have to spend CSP dollars on CSP work, we have to spend CODA dollars on CODA work, and we have to spend EQIP dollars on EQIP. You can obviously in the budget for salaries, training, expenses, travel, et cetera, as Meg already said, you can move budget-wise 10%, but we need to stick to the funds for your particular MOA. And it looks like only a couple more here.
Yep.
I probably covered most of this on the match for attendees at an information session or members of the public. Both are potential staff or potential match.
Yeah. Yeah, the last question is from Allison on the staffing update report. Once you hire your technician, complete the staffing report.
Yeah, and New Hampshire's answered their own question. That's what they've been told about federal locations. I know we're bumping up against your 2:30 time, and we really, really do appreciate everyone's time today. One of the things we maybe ought to close with is these grants have been supported and identified by your state leadership. And so your NRCS state conservationists, your state association, a state agency, it varies by state, have indicated this is a high priority work in your state. And that is important to us to have, to know that the funds are going to what your state leaders have identified as a high priority. I think the other thing I would mention on fringe benefits, NACD will later this fall, and the information is already beginning to come out for you in our weekly newsletter. We'll be offering a package of health insurance programs that might be of some help to some conservation districts. I won't go into any more than that today, but again, Meg, I'm going to sign off and thank folks for really listening to an excellent overview for onboarding these, and for those of you that already have grants, a refresher, and for those of you that are new, with an existing grant, an introduction to our process. So I'll turn it back to you, Meg, and I'm going to take off.
Fair enough, Rich. Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please, if you have additional questions or don't feel like your question was answered quite clearly, reach out to your region rep or myself. We'd be happy to talk it through in more detail with you. Have a good afternoon. Have a good weekend. Stay safe.
Thank you.